Time. There's never enough of it, is there? Because it just keeps on slip out, slip out, slip out into the future. Or, whatever the old song said. Anyway, hi everybody, this is Nathan P. Butler from the EU Review with a brand new episode of our Visual Showcase. This time taking a look at Star Wars year by year. Now, if you know anything about me, or the Star Wars Timeline Gold that I produce over at StarWarsFanWorks.com/timeline, you know that for me, a big thing when it comes to Star Wars is chronology. I like to see how the continuity develops in universe. You also may know that outside of Star Wars, I am a history teacher, among other things. I teach social studies classes at Creekside High School in Fairburn, Georgia. So I am someone who is very heavily into chronology, not just in the Star Wars universe, but outside of it. And outside of it, I do like to see the context in which the Star Wars films were released and produced. But up until now, there really hasn't been much in the way of a definitive tome that gives us a Star Wars chronology not in the Star Wars universe, but of how the films were made, how the franchise itself developed. That slot in the publishing line, so to speak, has finally been filled by Star Wars year by year. Now, if you were someone into Star Wars in-universe chronology, you probably picked up the original essential chronology. Eventually, you probably picked up the new essential chronology. Kevin J. Anderson and Dan Wallace did a great job on these, giving us a sense of what the Star Wars saga was like in universe. Dan Wallace happens to be one of the people who has returned now to take part in Star Wars year by year. Now, this is a different kind of Star Wars book than we are used to seeing. It's rare for us to see a Star Wars book that is hardback, heavy, and slipcased. About the most recent thing we've seen in that regard was the Star Wars Vault, and the Vault will be getting its own review at some point as a Visual Showcase episode. But that's not our concern right now. But for the most part, something like that's just about the only thing we tend to see in terms of big, slip-cased Star Wars books, at least guidebooks. A while back, though, there was a book that came out that piqued my interest, not on Star Wars, on something else, and that was something for Marvel Comics. I'm into comics in the sense that I like to read some, but I'm really interested in how the market has developed, how the franchises have developed, how different companies have developed. Very much like I'm into seeing the behind-the-scenes workings of things like video games, for example. And eventually, Dorling Kindersley produced the Marvel Chronicle, which, if you were to look inside this gigantic book, this huge sort of slipcase deal here, you would find a book that takes us year by year through Marvel Comics as it developed through different incarnations and so forth. And you'd find recognizable events. For example, for me, one of the biggest, most recognizable events in Marvel Comics was when Todd McFarlane picked up Spider-Man. Okay? So this is something that basically goes through the entirety of Marvel's history. It's a really good book, by the way, if you're into Marvel Comics. It's an excellent tome, and it came packaged in this gigantic sort of gift box, whatever you want to call it, this box, and had some artwork that went with it. It was a different black and white and color version of the full cover that you see on the outside, except it's got everything without any text over it or anything. But this was a great purchase. I remember picking this up and thinking, this was great. Man, I wish they would do something like this for, among other things, DC Comics, or even more, what about Star Wars? Isn't that a franchise that's just begging for a retrospective look like this? Apparently, it was already in the works at the time that I was reading that one. That brings us to the amazing publication released just a short time ago, and that's this baby. Star Wars, Year by Year, a Visual Chronicle. Now this is by Pablo Hidalgo and Dan Wallace and Ryder Wyndham. I mean, this is a heavy, heavy book written by several people who are, of course, big names in Star Wars publishing. If you've been around for a while, chances are you've read something they've produced, whether an article, a book, a guide, what have you. Now, once you pull this thing out of its slipcase, you'll find that it has kind of a neat cover underneath. But interestingly enough, if you try to match these up, I'm going to try to put this in such a way that you can see that here as I'm sitting on the edge of the bed and trying not to fall off. You notice here you've got your Darth Maul pre-production art and your Darth Maul actual art. Then you've got your Luke Skywalker pre-production, Luke Skywalker in the ship, etc., etc. What they do with these covers is underneath the real cover, or whatever you want to call it, has mostly concept art. The cover on top, the slipcase, has basically finished versions of different characters from the films, from Clone Wars. It's even got Starkiller on it. It's got the Emperor from Dark Empire on it. So basically later incarnations versus early or conceptual incarnations. I'm going to put this giant slipcase, just hollow, nothing in it. We'll put this aside. One thing that is often forgotten about for people who pick up year by year is that there are two pieces of artwork, very much like Marvel Chronicle had. In this case, or I guess not artwork, but two pictures, what you have is a lighting test bit of artwork, basically, of Obi-Wan and Satine from the Clone Wars Season 2, as the light is reflecting very heavily on this. I apologize for that. We also have a picture of Han Solo, or Harrison Ford as Han Solo, on the set of The Empire Strikes Back. Now, according to the book, you may not know this just by looking at the picture, but according to the book, when they show this same image, this is a never-before-seen still, or production photo, from the movie. This was something that until year by year had not been made public, which fits, given the fact that this is being released, of course, in 2010, which is the 30th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. As was the case previously with Marvel Chronicle, what you have here is literally a chronicle of the individual years of Star Wars production, where it has tidbits about the toy lines, about things like Revenge of the Jedi, the poster that wound up having the title changed and such. You have information about things like the Droids and Ewoks cartoons. Basically, if it's related to Star Wars as a franchise, one of the licensees, or maybe it's something tying generally into Star Wars through maybe the actors appearing in something else, that generally is included. If it's some event that George Lucas took part in, that tends to be included. Same thing with Rick McCallum later, especially when it comes to events talking about digital filmmaking. What you basically have here is a year-by-year trek from even a little bit before the Star Wars films are actually in production, leading all the way up to 2010. Though, of course, 2010 is a little bit smaller than the rest of the segments because there's not nearly as much to talk about or that can necessarily be revealed for 2010 since we're not entirely through the year. It really is an excellent, excellent book. If you're into in-universe Star Wars stuff, and if you get a chance to listen for the But Learniverse, I think it was episodes 22 through 27, I think, I did a retrospective set on Star Wars release years and what was happening in context for those release years. Take that, add in the type of retrospective we got with those a long time ago articles in Insider, and just blow it up to huge proportions of great information, tons and tons of information, year by year, usually, especially in more recent times, month by month information, and you've got Star Wars year by year. Now, I did say this was written by several individuals. The way this winds up breaking down, and they tell you on the opening pages here, is you got Ryder Wyndham doing the segment prior to 1973 and then up through 1983. So the section called Life Before Star Wars and then the section called The Original Trilogy. You have Dan Wallace writing the Between the Trilogies segment, which runs from 1984 to 1996. Bear in mind we're talking about before production on the prequels, not the prequel release. Then Pablo Hidalgo writes the last two segments, the prequel trilogy and Clone Wars and Beyond, which pick up in 1997 and continue up until now. It really is an excellent book. I have a couple of quibbles that I would toss out here just as, I don't want to say anything is perfect, but when you hear what my quibbles are, frankly, they're going to be so minuscule that I think you'll see that it's very difficult to find anything particularly negative about this particular book. It is an excellent, excellent piece of work, which is why I am rating it so highly here.